In the winter of 1942, the Atlantic Ocean was entering one of its darkest phases. Convoys were being hunted relentlessly by German U-boats, and Allied naval forces were stretched thin across thousands of miles of open sea. But among the countless warships navigating the ocean, one vessel would soon become a story of unsettling silence, a disappearance that offered no debris, no distress call, no final coordinates. The USS Cyclops. Commissioned in 1917, the Cyclops was not a combat vessel. It was a massive collier, a ship designed to transport coal, and by the Second World War, it had been repurposed as a support vessel capable of carrying strategic materials, including manganese or for steel production. It was slow, heavy, and not intended for battle. Yet it played an essential role in sustaining the logistical backbone of the Allied war effort. The Cyclops' final known journey began quietly. On March 4, 1942, it departed from a naval station in Norfolk, Virginia, carrying more than 300 sailors and thousands of tons of ore. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Weather reports indicated mild seas. German U-boat activity in the region, while present, had not yet reached the catastrophic levels of later months. But then, silence. 2 days after departure, Naval Command noted that the Cyclops had not checked in at 2 designated reporting checkpoints. At first, this was attributed to equipment failure or radio malfunction. Wartime communication gaps were not uncommon. Yet days passed, then a week, and no signal ever came. As Naval Command scrambled for answers, rumors spread among officers and enlisted sailors alike. Some believed the ship had been sunk in a single devastating torpedo strike. Others speculated structural failure, that the immense ore cargo had shifted during a storm, capsizing the ship before anyone could react. There were no survivors to confirm any theory. A classified intelligence report dated March 18, 1942, reads, "Absence of radio distress is inconsistent with known combat patterns. Loss of vessel remains unexplained." Another handwritten note, later found in the same file, simply read, "Cyclops vanished. No oil slick. No wreckage. No message." The absence of physical evidence troubled naval investigators. Even merchant ships sunk by torpedoes typically left behind debris, lifeboats, uniforms, documents, or oil slicks that floated for weeks. The Atlantic had swallowed many vessels, but nearly all left traces. Not Cyclops. As days became months, Naval Command archived the disappearance under a single phrase: status, missing, presumed lost. Yet the story didn't end there. As the war intensified, German U-boat logs were recovered and translated by Allied intelligence. Thousands of entries described torpedo strikes, convoy interceptions, and engagements with destroyers. But no U-boat reported engaging the Cyclops. Not one. And in the meticulously recorded world of Kriegsmarine submarine warfare, that omission was strange. Some analysts later proposed sabotage. The Cyclops had carried a small number of foreign crew members and civilians, including several German nationals detained at the outbreak of war. No formal evidence ever supported this theory, but privately, some within the U.S. Navy suspected internal foul play. Others theorized the ship encountered an uncharted minefield, possibly one deployed by the Germans months earlier. But again, the lack of wreckage contradicted typical outcomes. A brief entry from a sailor stationed at Naval Station Norfolk captures the emotional toll. Cyclops gone. No funeral, no battlefield, no grave. Hard to understand how a ship that size just disappears. We're left with silence. Today, historians still debate the ship's fate. Underwater search efforts in later decades, including sonar sweeps during the Cold War, failed to locate the wreck. Its loss remains one of the largest non-combat disappearances in U.S. naval history. As the war pressed forward, the ocean claimed more vessels and more names were added to the lists of those missing. But the silence surrounding Cyclops set a precedent, a warning to every ship that followed. The ocean does not always return what it takes. And in the coming years, more patrols, better trained, better armed, and fully prepared for war, would meet similarly inexplicable ends. Their stories were only beginning. By the summer of 1943, the balance of naval warfare in Europe was shifting. Allied convoys were now escorted by improved sonar systems, long-range patrol aircraft, and experienced escort crews. Yet despite these advances, the ocean remained unpredictable, a battlefield with hazards both visible and hidden. In this growing tension, one vessel would quietly slip beneath the surface without a trace: HMS Triton. HMS Triton was a T-class submarine, launched by the Royal Navy in 1937 and forged for stealth, long-range patrols, and precision strikes. Measuring nearly 275 feet long and carrying a crew of about 62 sailors, it was armed with 11 torpedo tubes and state-of-the-art communications equipment for its time. 4 years, Triton had served with distinction, carrying out reconnaissance missions across the Mediterranean theater, a region controlled by Axis minefields, air patrols, and armored U-boats. Its final assignment was strategic but routine: monitor suspected German resupply routes between Rhodes and Crete, 2 islands under firm Axis control. Intelligence believed these waters were being used to transport ammunition, fuel, and personnel to reinforce German garrisons resisting Allied advances. Triton's departure on August 6, 1943, was unremarkable. Weather conditions were calm, visibility was fair, and its crew was seasoned. The submarine left from Malta, a heavily defended outpost that served as a nerve center for Allied naval coordination. Its last radio transmission came 4 days later. A brief report. No urgency. No indication of pursuit or mechanical failure. Just a confirmation. Continuing patrol. No contacts. Position unchanged. Then nothing. At first, Naval Command assumed radio discipline was being enforced. Submarines frequently operated in silence to avoid enemy interception. But when Triton failed to check in for its scheduled coded pulse transmission, concern shifted to alarm. A classified Royal Navy memorandum from August 18, 1943 states, "No communication received. Patrol area heavily mined. Potential loss acknowledged pending confirmation." During this period, minefields were not static. Storms, altered tides, and poor wartime mapping often shifted mines miles from their original charts. While collisions with mines were tragically common among submarines, such incidents typically left behind surface evidence, insulation, life vests, or oil slicks. Yet the Mediterranean remained still. Weeks passed. No rescue flares. No floating debris. No German victory logs claiming a submarine kill. The Triton had joined the ranks of missing vessels, erased from an ocean that rarely offered silence without reason. Crew families sought answers. Letters of concern reached British Admiralty offices in London, many unanswered. One mother wrote in September 1943, "If he died in battle, tell me. If he drowned, tell me. But please do not tell me nothing." Behind closed doors, investigators explored alternative explanations. Some suspected an onboard malfunction, a torpedo misfire, or internal explosion. A theory gained traction. German deep-water defensive nets in the Aegean may have ensnared the submarine, trapping it below crush depth. But without evidence, every conclusion was speculation. After the war ended in 1945, Allied researchers gained access to German naval archives. Submarine kill logs were exhaustive, yet not once did the Kriegsmarine claim Triton. No minefields in the designated patrol zone were recorded as detonated. Axis records showed no visual or sonar contact with an Allied submarine during Triton's patrol window. This discovery only deepened the absence. In 1951, a Royal Navy review revisited the case. The report concluded, loss likely attributed to drifting minefield or mechanical failure at depth. Final position unknown. Unclassified decades later, the summary now feels less like a conclusion and more like a reluctant resignation. Today, underwater archaeology teams have scanned expansive sectors of the Mediterranean seafloor using sonar and autonomous submersibles. Many wrecks have been identified, some merchant, some military, but Triton remains elusive. For historians, the silence surrounding its disappearance echoes not only strategic uncertainty but human cost. 62 men sailed into a war zone routine patrol, confident, capable, experienced, and simply never came home. As one historian stated in a 1974 BBC interview, "Ships are not ghosts, they sink, they explode, they rest somewhere. But sometimes the ocean hides the truth longer than history can tolerate." The fate of HMS Triton remains one of the unanswered questions of Allied Mediterranean operations during World War II. And although wartime seas claimed many vessels, Triton's vanishing without records, witnesses, or remnants stands apart. But as the war carried on, the Mediterranean was not the only ocean holding its secrets. Thousands of miles away in the vast Pacific theater, another patrol vessel would soon vanish, this time under far more mysterious and sudden circumstances. The pattern was emerging, and the unanswered questions were far from over. By 1944, the Pacific Ocean had become a vast chessboard of shifting fronts, deadly ambushes, and hidden naval routes. The United States Navy was now pressing deep into territory once believed unreachable, aiming to sever Japan's resource lifelines and isolate fortified island strongholds. It was during this turbulent phase of the war that one vessel, the USS Scorpion, departed for what should have been a standard reconnaissance patrol. Instead, it became one of the Pacific theater's most unsettling disappearances. The USS Scorpion SS-278 was a Gato-class submarine, 311 feet long, powered by diesel-electric engines and capable of remaining submerged for extended periods with silent running operation. Crewed by approximately 77 sailors, it carried torpedoes, deck guns, encrypted radios, and the latest sonar systems available to the U.S. submarine fleet. Its mission profile was aggressive. Scorpion was not only expected to monitor Japanese traffic, it was cleared to engage and sink enemy vessels. On January 29, 1944, Scorpion left Midway Atoll under radio silence orders. The patrol area assigned covered waters south of the Yellow Sea, territory patrolled by enemy aircraft, minefields, and destroyer groups trained specifically for anti-submarine warfare. Yet to the crew this was not unfamiliar terrain. Scorpion had already completed several successful combat patrols, earning the trust and confidence of its commanders. Its final communication came just days later, a brief encrypted message confirming weather conditions and travel progress. The message ended abruptly, neither signaling distress nor technical failure. After decoding, naval analysts noted something strange. The report stopped mid-sentence, cut cleanly, without the typical formatting closure required by naval radio protocol. At first, no alarm was raised. Radio silence could mean the submarine was stalking a target or evading detection. But when the scheduled check-in window passed, then the emergency fallback window, questions began circulating through Pacific Fleet Command. In February 1944, naval intelligence intercepted a Japanese report referencing a submarine engagement. Japanese destroyer Wakatake allegedly depth-charged an unidentified vessel south of Shikoku, Japan. The report described bubbles, oil, and floating debris, signs commonly associated with a confirmed kill. Yet when the document was examined, details were inconsistent. The debris described did not match American construction materials, and no submarine identification markers were found. It was a lead but not confirmation. Weeks later, an even more puzzling document was uncovered during prisoner interrogation. A captured Japanese naval officer claimed a submarine had been detected attempting to navigate a Japanese mine corridor, a hazardous maneuver often attempted when evading surface patrols. According to the officer, the submarine likely triggered an acoustic mine, collapsing its hull instantly. But again, the location he described did not match the Scorpion's documented patrol zone. Naval investigators struggled to reconcile conflicting intelligence. Theories emerged, debated, dismissed, reopened, and archived. One officer noted in a confidential margin, "Enemy sources' contradiction suggests disinformation or mistaken identity. Cannot verify the Scorpion as destroyed based on provided evidence." Families were notified quietly. No funeral. No definitive cause. Just a single sentence in an official telegram. Missing, presumed lost in enemy waters. For the men aboard, the war did not end. They remained at sea, unaccounted for. As decades passed, researchers returned to the mystery. In the early 1990s, oceanographic mapping programs surveyed parts of the submarine's last known operating region. Several wrecks were identified, including one Gato-class submarine believed to be USS Grunion, not Scorpion. Expeditions continued, using evolving sonar and robotics capable of exploring deeper waters than ever before. Yet nothing conclusively linked to the missing vessel was found. One naval historian described the disappearance bluntly. Submarines can be hunted, sunk, or scuttled. But they do not vanish without cause. The question is not whether the Scorpion was lost, but how and why the evidence has resisted discovery. Today, the loss of USS Scorpion remains one of the Pacific theater's enduring naval mysteries. Theories persist: a mine, a torpedo misfire, mechanical failure, or enemy fire. But without wreckage or survivor testimony, every explanation remains plausible and incomplete. As the war continued, more submarines would join its fate, vessels from Allied and Axis forces alike, swallowed by reefs, trenches, or battlefields where silence became the last recorded entry. The ocean was not finished. And soon, another patrol, equally routine, equally confident, would vanish into history with the same disturbing quiet. By late 1944, the Mediterranean was no longer the strategic battleground it once had been. The Axis presence was weakening, supply lines were shrinking, and Allied advances through Italy and North Africa were steadily tightening the noose. Yet, despite shifting momentum, the sea remained a hazardous and unpredictable environment, scattered with underwater mines, fortified coastal batteries, and enemy patrols desperate to protect what remained of their shrinking territories. It was in this tense atmosphere that HMS Regulus embarked on a mission that would become one of the most enigmatic disappearances in British naval history. HMS Regulus was a Royal Navy submarine built for long-range reconnaissance and covert surveillance, frequently operating behind enemy lines. Launched in 1929, she was one of the older submarines in service by the time of the Second World War. At 296 feet long and armed with forward and aft torpedo tubes, Regulus still remained formidable, though by 1944 newer technology had surpassed her capabilities. Even so, experience mattered, and the men aboard the vessel were seasoned veterans of underwater warfare. On November 23, 1944, Regulus departed the port of Alexandria under strict operational silence. Her assigned patrol zone included the Aegean Sea, where remnants of German naval activity continued to reinforce isolated island garrisons. These islands, among them Leros, Kos, and Rhodes, were strategic stepping stones controlling movement between the eastern Mediterranean and the Dardanelles Strait. Regulus' objective was straightforward: observe enemy supply movements and, if given clear opportunity, intercept and disrupt maritime reinforcement traffic. It was a role she had performed successfully before. Her last confirmed radio exchange occurred 3 days after departure, coded, brief, and routine. Continuing patrol. No enemy contact. Maintaining silence. Nothing indicated concern. Nothing hinted at danger. But after that message, Regulus never responded again. British Mediterranean Command waited for scheduled communication checkpoints, first routine, then secondary, then emergency recall signal windows. Each passed without reply. At first, the loss was attributed to German minefields, many of which had been repositioned by storms or insufficiently charted. But intelligence reports soon complicated the assumption. In December 1944, an intercepted German naval transmission referenced the deployment of new anti-submarine barriers near the Dodecanese Islands, large steel nets anchored to the seafloor, designed to trap or damage submarines attempting penetration. If Regulus had encountered one, the results could have been catastrophic. Entanglement would immobilize the submarine, preventing ascent and ultimately crushing the hull under immense pressure. However, no German records confirmed a net breach, mine detonation, or submarine kill. Years later, a wartime diary entry from a German lookout stationed on Rhodes was discovered. It contained one chilling line. Night patrol reported metallic echo beneath waves, too slow for dolphin, too large for wreck. Whether the observation was connected to Regulus remains unknown. Compounding the mystery was the post-war review conducted by the Royal Navy in 1947. The investigators were granted access to captured Axis logs, minefield maps, and radio traffic archives. After months of analysis, the final report concluded: loss cause undetermined, multiple contributing possibilities, no definitive enemy engagement confirmed. To many historians, this phrasing reflected uncertainty rather than closure. In later decades, underwater survey teams began mapping parts of the Aegean seafloor, searching for missing wartime wrecks. Several submarines were discovered, British, German, and Italian, along steep underwater drop-offs and jagged seabed ravines. But none matched the dimensions, hull markings, or torpedo configuration of Regulus. Sonar scans revealed deep trenches descending thousands of meters, far beyond the operational testing depths of wartime submarines. Should Regulus have descended accidentally or while attempting to evade detection, the collapse would have been instantaneous, leaving little structural form behind. For the families of the 55 crew members aboard, no wreckage meant no marker to mourn. A memorial stone was eventually erected in Portsmouth, engraved with the ship's crest and a line from a Royal Navy hymn: "They that go down to the sea in ships shall not be forgotten." Even today, the Aegean remains a graveyard of wartime steel, aircraft, landing craft, destroyers, and submarines alike. Among these silent remnants, HMS Regulus is still missing. Her final patrol remains undocumented beyond a single cold transmission, routine, confident, unaware it would be her last. The Mediterranean chapter of disappearing vessels was closing. But across the Atlantic, closer to home, another loss would strike the Allied fleet, not in battle but during what should have been a simple training patrol. It was a reminder that even in safe waters, the ocean could still take without warning and offer nothing back. By 1945, the war in Europe was nearing its end, and the Atlantic, once filled with wolf packs and burning convoys, had grown quieter. The United States Navy, preparing for the final phases of the Pacific Campaign, increasingly shifted its focus to training exercises and operational readiness. It was during one of these routine drills, close to home and far from active combat, that the USS '09 vanished beneath the surface, and never returned. Commissioned during the First World War, USS '09, SS-70, was part of the aging O-class submarine series. At only 175 feet long, she was significantly smaller and more primitive than the more modern Gato-class submarines dominating the Pacific War effort. Yet, despite her age, she was recommissioned in 1941 to help train new submarine crews and test emerging naval procedures. She carried a complement of 33 men, experienced officers, newly trained sailors, and technicians familiarizing themselves with older submarine systems. On June 19, 1945, '09 departed from Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in New Hampshire as part of a deep-dive training operation alongside two other submarines, USS '10 and USS '06. Weather conditions were reported as stable. Seas were calm. If there was ever a safe time for submarine training, it was that day. At 8:37 a.m., '09 signaled she was beginning her descent. It was the last message she would ever send. Normally, a deep-dive exercise involved incremental descent while maintaining constant communication with surface support vessels. The O-class submarines were originally rated to withstand pressure at depths of about 212 feet, 65 meters. However, age and wartime were meant the integrity of their hulls was never fully certain. Minutes passed, then an hour. When no further communications arrived, the surface escort sent repeated radio queries. All went unanswered. At first, the delay was interpreted as radio malfunction, a frequent occurrence on older submarines. But as time continued to pass with no sign of surfacing, urgency replaced patience. By 10:30 a.m., destroyer escorts and salvage crews were dispatched. For hours they searched. At 3:17 p.m., sonar detected something beneath the waves, a faint metallic signature approximately 450 feet, 137 meters, below the surface. If it was '09, she was at more than double her safe operational depth. No submarine of her type could survive that pressure. The next morning, divers were deployed, pushing their limits to unprecedented depths for that time period. Remarkably, they confirmed what the sonar suggested. The wreck of USS '09 lay on the seabed, its hull crushed inward by impossible pressure. The steel casing was folded like paper. There were no signs of escape attempts. No released buoys. No emergency ascent. Every man aboard had died instantly. A Navy technical log written days later stated, "Failure of hull likely occurred at depth exceeding tested structural tolerance. No evidence of explosion or enemy action." But even with a confirmed wreck, questions lingered. Why had '09 descended so far, more than twice her depth rating? Why did no distress signal precede the collapse? And why had the crew, trained extensively in submarine operation, continued beyond the danger threshold? Some officers suggested mechanical malfunction, perhaps a stuck diving plane or uncontrolled ballast failure. Others suspected structural weakness from years of inactive storage. One internal memorandum, later declassified, speculated, "Ship may have been compromised before dive. Possible unseen cracks or pressure stress accumulated over dry dock cycles." If true, the disaster may have been inevitable before the submarine even left port. In 1946, the Navy declared the wreck of USS '09 a protected war grave. Salvage operations were deemed too dangerous and too technically difficult. The submarine and the remains of her crew were left in silence beneath the Atlantic. A memorial ceremony took place weeks later. Families stood along the New Hampshire shoreline as a Navy chaplain read the names of the lost crew. A bugler played taps. The ocean was calm, indifferent, quiet. For the Navy, the loss of '09 marked more than a tragic accident. It was a reminder that the sea remained unpredictable, even without enemy fire. Routine patrol or wartime mission makes no difference. The ocean decides. And soon, another chapter would close, not with an accident, but with silence so complete that even its final position remains unknown to this day. Only one story remains. When the war finally came to a close in September 1945, the world celebrated an end to global conflict, occupation, and relentless loss. Yet for many families, spouses, mothers, sons, and daughters, peace brought no closure. Across the vast oceans, some ships simply never returned. They were not sunk in battle, not listed in German U-boat logs, not recovered by search crews, and never formally accounted for. Among these unresolved wartime silences stood the final and perhaps most haunting case, the disappearance of an Allied naval patrol whose fate remains unknown even today. Unlike the other wartime disappearances documented throughout the conflict, this final patrol was not undertaken during intense combat operations. Instead, it was one of the many low-profile reconnaissance assignments conducted near remote Atlantic approaches, territories vital for detecting smugglers, rogue U-boats attempting evacuation to South America, and remaining hostile naval elements refusing surrender. The patrol consisted of a small British escort trawler, built for coastal defense and anti-submarine detection, and an American PC-class submarine chaser, outfitted with sonar, signal intelligence equipment, and a reinforced steel bridge suitable for rough weather. Together, they formed a joint Allied patrol group tasked with monitoring suspected enemy survivor routes off the Azores. Their last recorded departure was logged on December 6, 1945. Conditions were initially calm, with manageable Atlantic swells and stable visibility. Routine hourly check-ins were made through encrypted radio channels used throughout the later years of the war. Then, at 22:46, the final message was received. It was unremarkable, nothing more than a simple navigational update, logged by Allied Naval Communications as "Position stable. Continuing patrol. No contact." After that transmission, radio silence fell. No distress call ever followed. No SOS beacon. No Morse light. Nothing. When the escort failed to report for its scheduled recheck 8 hours later, Naval Command initiated standard procedure: repeated call attempts, weather condition checks, and traffic intercept monitoring. There were no responses, not even static. By December 8, search aircraft were deployed. Catalina flying boats traced grid patterns across the assigned patrol zone. Destroyer escorts later expanded the radius to search for wreckage or oil slicks. None were found. Weather analysis determined that no major storms had passed through the area. Reports from commercial ships confirmed calm conditions. No minefields had been charted within the operational zone. And wartime intelligence made it clear: no Axis naval force was active in the region by that time. Yet 2 vessels, crewed by 59 trained sailors, had vanished completely. The official inquiry extended through early 1946. More than 80 witness statements were gathered from nearby ports, patrol officers, and merchant crews. Radar logs were examined. Morse intercept lines were reviewed. Nothing indicated sabotage, mutiny, distress, or accidental collision. The final conclusion, archived under wartime classification protocols, read: cause unknown. Believed lost. In 1959, during a parliamentary review of unresolved wartime maritime losses, a retired Royal Navy intelligence officer submitted a short note requesting the case be reopened. His argument referenced unclassified Argentine naval testimony claiming an unidentified Allied vessel had been heard on emergency frequencies in the South Atlantic weeks after the patrol disappeared. But the signal was never recorded. By the time deep-sea survey technology evolved in the late 20th century, the original search radius had become nearly impossible to narrow. Thousands of square miles of ocean remained potential resting ground, and the depth in many areas exceeded the crush limits of wartime submarines and survey equipment. Oceans keep secrets well. Today, the loss remains one of the final unsolved Allied naval disappearances of the Second World War. Unlike vessels found decades later resting silently on the seabed, this patrol has never been located. No wreckage has surfaced, no survivor account was ever recorded, and no enemy report confirms its destruction. For historians, the disappearance is not only a logistical mystery, it is a reminder of the fragility of wartime records, the limits of mid-century technology, and the unpredictability of the sea. For families, it was and remains something far more personal. In Portsmouth, Norfolk, Halifax, Glasgow, and Boston, memorial plaques list the names of the missing sailors. Under every one of them appears the same stark line: no known grave but the sea. World War II ended in 1945. But some stories never returned home. Some never reached the harbor. Some remain silent beneath the waves, waiting for history to find them.